Be warned, the following contains graphic descriptions and situations not suitable to all audiences. In addition to the usual fare, this program frequently discusses manipulation, violence, death, sex, negative stereotypes, and a surprising amount of regurgitation. Listener discretion is advised. It must have seemed like a truly biblical moment for the followers of the new mode of power. Gathering at the top of High Rock in Massachusetts was significant enough. But on this day, it must have felt like they were standing on the top of Mount Horeb with Moses. And in a way, they were. They made the trek upon the direction of their prophet, John Murray Spear, brought there to bear witness to the birth of a new Messiah. Already, the woman designated by the spirits to give birth was in a trance, lying on the ground and writhing as if she were in labor. Those around her wanted to comfort her, but were helpless to do so. It was unlike any birth humanity had ever known. Positioned next to the woman was the machine she was meant to bring life to, and she would have to do this on her own. After 2 hours of rolling, wincing, and moaning, the woman awoke. "Is it finished?" Spear and his followers asked as they helped her sit up. She nodded, and the group's attention returned to the machine. They watched and waited until someone asked, "Did it move?" I'm Jennifer Beck, and this is The Haunted Hustle. Creating a mechanical messiah is no simple task, even for those with a direct communication to the spirits. When Spear announced his plans to bring about the second coming by creating the being himself, his followers, the practical spiritualists, imagined the process would be constructive, if not illuminating. Comparing the process to heating a pot in order to boil water, Spear began his task by consulting the Association of Electricizers, a ghostly group of men pulled from the history books, including Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Although that is as close to a book as the project would come, who needs education? Spear preferred to gain his knowledge by making it up as he went. For 9 months, he went into trances daily, emerging to draw designs and instructions down to the last detail. He invited guests to observe him as he willingly surrendered to the electrical spirits in exchange for a donation. Building your own personal Jesus is expensive, you know, and all Spear had in abundance was gumption and orgies. When he finished the plans in 1854, he and his team moved to High Rock Cottage in Lynn, Massachusetts. And with about $2,000 in seed money, approximately $50,000 today, he began building the greatest spiritual revelation of the age. In a dramatic departure to some of the personalities we see today in religion, entertainment, and politics, every single dollar Spear raised for the project went straight into constructing the machine. To his credit, he neither profited nor used the funds to recoup a personal expense of any kind. I think it shows that he truly believed he was doing heaven's work, even if he was perhaps a little overconfident and a little underprepared. With no blueprints, the project came together in daily spurts, much like the Winchester Mystery House. Workers would just report in the morning and help build whatever Spear imagined he channeled the day before. As construction proceeded for almost a year, Hewitt did his part to continue the hype. The new era covered the construction of the electrical infant, describing the device corresponded to the human body. But I don't know that even Spear would describe it that way. The completed project looked more like a curious piece of furniture. A well-fashioned rectangular box sat on top of a walnut table. The box housed a drawer which pulled out to reveal a crucifix, a journal, a spoon, a bottle of white powder, and sundry items that, when attached to the device on the top of the box, did something very special, or at least that's what Hewitt claimed. I haven't been able to figure out what that very special thing was, but the white powder and spoon sound more like Rick James than Jesus Christ. On top of the box was mounted a symmetrical device comprising of a glass column surmounted by a small cast-iron skull wearing a helmet. Within the glass column was a brass bell suspended on a chain, kind of like a kitschy bust of Cerebro. On either side of the glass column were two black horns, much like the ones present on Edison's early talking machines. At their sides, a set of brass balance scales connected to weights. Flanking the column towards the rear were two glass Crookes solar radiometers, which moved when exposed to sunlight and photons. Like those little glass spheres with the metal spinners inside that you can still find at those big mega gas stations. If that wasn't enough, the Robo-Jesus also had a revolving steel arm, zinc and copper batteries for brains, and insulated table legs. Or, as Hewitt wrote, a brain made up of zinc and copper plates, a chest of wires, bars, chemicals, and magnets, antennae from which to draw power from the skies, and earthing rods for legs. He left out mention of the iron plates standing in for the machine's lungs, which would supposedly rust as a sign of breathing. Maybe that was just a little too difficult to spin. When Andrew Jackson Davis decided to see what his old friend was up to, the scene he encountered freaked him out. There he was, surrounded by followers, wires, batteries, and plates spread out everywhere, acting as if he were performing surgery. As Jackson Davis described it in the June 1854 issue of the Spiritual Telegraph, for them, each wire is precious, sacred as a spiritual nerve. Unable to resist comparing Frankenstein to the man he had so passionately encouraged just a few years earlier, he feared something had gone terribly wrong. While he had no doubt the new motor was genuinely supernatural and spirit-inspired, after all, no man smarter than a fifth grader would have ever thought of something like this. He couldn't help but worry his buddy shot his bolt. In his writing, he accused Speer of suffering from, quote, the terrible misfortune of being easily imposed upon by his own impulses, mistaking them at least 2/3 of the time for impressions from higher intelligences. The delusion Jackson Davis feared distorted whatever spiritual messages Speer was receiving into a warped version of his former dogma. To him, Speer was no longer a seer. He was a cult leader hell-bent on worshiping a false idol. He was the personification of spiritualism, only in reverse. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last time Jackson Davis would experience a what-the-hell moment from his friend. As the build came together, a problem was detected. The machine didn't do anything. Speer shrugged this off and assured followers everything was going to plan. The machine, he said, was like a body. It still needed to be brought to life. To do this, he donned a suit covered with gemstones and metal strips, and, resembling Liberace in concert in Vegas, entered a deep trance. The objective? To establish a psychic umbilical link to his creation that afterwards would require similar energy to maintain. Like any other infant, Speer insisted the device depended on its womb for its energy and nourishment. In absence of this, or any semblance of sense for that matter, Speer instructed his group hold constant vigil over their device. You guessed it, more orgies. But if this seems a bit odd, and I truly hope by now something in Speer's methods stands out for you as such, he said the new Messiah needed more. It needed a mother. Just as the original Son of God needed the Virgin Mary to bring him into the world, Speer determined his machine needed the same. virginity wasn't a requirement, only a press campaign. Hewitt's headlines went on to announce the search for the Mary of the new dispensation. Mainstream news soon picked up the story, and Jackson Davis thoroughly lost his shit. With Hewitt feeding the story with newfangled language and references to electric angels, the public seized on efforts to track this mysterious woman down. The new Mary was a follower who lived nearby in Boston, the wife of a doctor. Convenient, right? While details as to just how he acquired his knowledge were conspicuously absent, Speer was quoted in the spiritualist papers gushing. How fondly, how constantly, how widely is this one beloved? How beautiful is the influence this woman exerts? Wherever she is, she attracts in this particular. She possesses a most remarkable character. Her friends know no bounds to their affection for this one, and there is nothing that they would leave undone to gratify her. There passes from this woman a very marked influence. It's not precisely the religious influence. It's not precisely the moral influence. It's not precisely the practical influence. But it is, so to speak, a compost of them all. And these are charmingly intermingled, imparting a most adhesive influence. If only they had spent an equal amount of gusto recording the woman's name. Some sources claim she was Sarah Newton, or possibly Mrs. Alonzo E. Newton, for those who believe it is far more important to record her husband's middle initial than any mention of her first name at all. Others aren't much better, spelling Mrs. Samantha Mettler's name with an E and two A's, or the standard spelling. Either way, practical spiritualists recorded Mrs. Samantha Sarah Mettler Newton had been experiencing visions of her own, ones in which the angels announced her coming mission in similarly flowery and vague language. When she met with Speer, he told her she was chosen and needed to move in with him so he could widely instruct her on her high purpose. With such an enticing offer, she left her husband and moved to High Rock at once, where she and the rest of Speer's band maintained the umbilical link with the machine. Supposedly, this was in order to transfer their life force into the Frankenbot psychically, but Jackson Davis was doubtful. He'd never heard of such a practice involving so much sex. On July 28, 1854, Speer announced himself spent, and that at 10 o'clock the following morning, Mary would give birth. The next morning, with his followers and heavy machinery in tow, they made the trek up the side of a nearby mountain to begin. Can't help but wonder why he did that. Nothing about his mechanical baby was suited for backpacking. When preparations were made and the area adequately arranged, and sadly these details are murky too, Mary went into labor. Or fell into a trance. You know, she was directed by Speer, so whatever. She lay on the ground beside the device, moaning and writhing in pain until it was complete. She then quickly regained consciousness, and Speer declared the birth achieved. Frankenstein had been brought to reality. Once again, the spirits had displayed their phenomenal power by creating the art of all arts, the science of all science, the new Messiah, the philosopher's stone, the great spiritual revelation of the age, God's last best gift to man, and Kevin. Okay, I made that last one up. It's said that when she reached out to touch the new motor, its inner rotator moved ever so slightly. The practical spiritualists took this as proof and rejoiced. Hewitt emblazoned headlines like, "The thing moves and the time of deliverance has come at last." But Jackson Davis remained unconvinced. He really wanted to believe, but just couldn't bring himself to do it. To him, the so-called virgin birth was no more than suggestion, superstition, and sexual exhaustion. After thinking about it for a time, he exonerated his protégé and blamed the spirits instead. He concluded that poorly educated, mechanically defunct spirits had deceived him. They used Spear to conduct their experiments and left him holding the bag. Well, it was either that or everything Jackson Davis believed in was wrong. What do you think? Hewitt covered the birthing of the new mode of power and its proud father in the style typical of the spiritualist movement. Quote, "We are prepared to announce to the world, first, that spirits have revealed a wholly new mode of power to take the place of all other motive powers. Second, that this revelation has been embodied in a model machine by human cooperation with the powers above. Third, that results are, thus far, satisfactory to its warmest friends. The thing moves." We have the birth of a new science, a new philosophy, and a new life. The time of deliverance has come at last, and henceforth the career of humanity is upward and onward, a mighty, a noble, a godlike career. All the revelations of spiritualism heretofore, all the control of spirits over mortals, and the instruction and discipline they have given us, have only paved the way, as it were, for the advent of a great practical movement such as the world little dreams of, though it has long deeply yearned for it, and agonized and groaned away its life because it didn't come sooner. And this mode of power is to lead the way in the great speedily coming salvation. It is to be the physical savior of the race. The history of its inception, its various stages of progress, and its completion will show the world a most beautiful and significant analogy to the advent of Jesus as the spiritual savior of the race. Hence, we most confidently assert that the advent of the science of all sciences, the philosophy of all philosophies, and the art of all arts has now fairly commenced. The child is born. Not long hence, he will go alone. Then he will dispute with the doctors in the temple of science. And then? Nothing. No matter how much it was watched, no matter how much it was revered, no matter how many orgasms it witnessed, nothing happened. The new mode of power just sat there, like a lump. When word got out, Spear's support dwindled. Discouraged followers left and returned to their lives, and the locals grew sick of him fast. Rumblings about the strange sex cult in town soon followed. But he wasn't ready to give up. He told his growingly worried followers that, like any infant, their new Messiah needed to grow. These things just take time. Under his direction, the practical spiritualists dismantled the machine and moved it to Randolph, New York. There, it was reassembled in a new lab the association promised had better magnetic energies. And he and his remaining followers doubled down. He also took to the press, telling Hewitt the Messiah was still gestating. Would it not be wiser to wait a little and witness its growth than to attempt the strangulation of the infant, he said? But Jackson Davis had reached his limit. He'd had it with Spear's stubborn refusal to see the reality staring him right in the face. More than that, with word quickly spreading about exactly how the creation had been supported, not to mention the depravities that took place while Mary had been nursing, something that hadn't been released but most likely would if Spear couldn't be made to keep it in his pants, Jackson Davis feared he would bring down the whole movement. And man's last chance to personally commune with the divine, attain enlightenment, and bring about a new age on earth would go with it. So he used his more influential chops to launch a press campaign of his own. He declared the new motor a failure, described practical spiritualists as deluded, and painted Spear as a misguided chump acting on behalf of a bunch of spirits no more like Benjamin Franklin than flat earthers. After reading his eloquent argument, if someone still chose to wait for this Messiah, they'd be waiting a long time. Following the slam, practical spiritualists were rejected by the movement, seen as ignorant hicks. Soon, other dabblers in spiritualism joined the mockery. P.T. Barnum, self-proclaimed Prince of Deception, called the new motor a humbug, adding, quote, "If things like this are going to happen, the ladies will be afraid to sleep alone in the house if so much as a sewing machine or an apple corer be about. And Spear, the boy who'd pulled himself out of the factories, who earned his place at the pulpit of the Universalist Church, the man who had so bravely spoke out for the poor, mistreated, and overlooked, was ruined. He was a joke. A few months later, a superstitious mob broke into the workshop under cover of darkness and destroyed the machine, tearing out its heart and trampling the bits under their feet. Spear responded in the press by saying, quote, "Truth crushed to the earth shall rise again." One spiritualist equated it to kind of an it is what it is moment. Quote, "I know the friends who were engaged in constructing this mechanism, and those who cheerfully gave their means to promote the work will mourn that the world has not yet arrived at a condition when it could welcome a philanthropic effort of this kind. But thus it is. It didn't wish the effort to succeed, and it determined it should not." But I don't think this can be dismissed so easily. Spear's DIY savior, his calling, the thing from which he drew so much attention and adoration, the thing he poured his everything into for so long, was gone. Attacked in the very same way he was when this whole journey began. Is this a coincidence? To dismiss it as such, don't we have to dismiss the original attack and the trauma as well? Some suspect, and I count myself among them, that Spear and his stragglers concocted the story in hopes of closing the chapter. If the mechanical body of God was killed, he could save face and move on. It also aligns itself beautifully with the way the Bible describes Jesus' crucifixion and ascension. And it still left things open for a sequel, just in case the association came to him with any new ideas in the future. Some people believe Spear and his followers sacrificed their own credibility to protect their creation, that the tale served to draw the increasingly negative attention away as they waited for it to grow. For them, the machine still exists somewhere, slowly gaining strength after 170 years of seclusion. And one day, it will unveil itself to humanity as the second coming of Christ, the Metal Messiah. Most spiritualists took a neutral stance. In the Spiritual Telegraph, S.B. Britton summed it up like this: "If the new motor is to be the physical savior of the race, it will probably rise again." They maintained there was still work to do. After all, Benjamin Franklin was still firing off instructions as fast as mediums could make them up. Spear never stopped trying to bring about the divine social state on Earth that the new mode of power had promised. The new motor would live again, he said, but it would never be the engine to remake the world. Instead, its second coming would be the sign the new era had finally arrived. He continued to lecture, despite the fact that the vast majority of the movement largely rejected him. By the end, he was seen as little more than an oddity. Without his practical spiritualists, Spear moved on with his life. He married women's rights activist Caroline Hinckley, and the couple had a child. Hinckley was good for him. His later lectures reflected a return to his more earthbound interests, like women's emancipation. Although they continued to include doctrine about free love and communal living, at the behest of the spirits, of course. He announced his retirement from public life in 1872. The association decided his work was done. He died in October 1887 and was buried in Mount Moriah Cemetery. The spiritualist newspaper, The Banner of Light, described his death as the transition of a veteran reformer. Cataloging his years of service towards temperance, abolition, women's and prisoners' rights, his obituary reflected upon his 39 years of spiritualism and condensed it into 3 sentences, concluding that the undefeatable nature of the man had gone to participate, as an arisen spirit, in new efforts for human good. There was no mention of the goal to which he had dedicated his life and had ultimately escaped him. The new era and the machine his spirits had said would bring it into being has yet to rise again. Stay tuned after the break for some more about the new mode of power. In Tales of the Messiah, one always has to leave open the possibility of resurrection. And in July of 2019, the new mode of power may just have had theirs, when a machine fitting its description was uncovered in Greeley, Colorado. It was discovered in the home of Miss Ackerman, or Old Lady Crackerman as the locals called her. Ackerman had been known for her eclectic collection and curious antiques. When she died without a next of kin, her house was cleared and the contents removed, put up for auction to benefit a local animal shelter. Historians hardly knew what to make of it when the crew charged with fulfilling Ackerman's vital affairs came upon the curious cabinet. It was locked away in an attic in the furthest corner of the mansion, nor is it known how the machine survived the incident in Randolph. How it found its way to Colorado and into Ackerman's collection also remains a mystery. No records appear to have accompanied it. They were only tipped off to its identity by the brass plate with the words, "New Mode of Power, John Murray Spear," engraved upon it. For its age, it was in remarkable condition. Its tubes, dials, cogs, and glass cylinders remained intact, protected by a dusty sheet. At the time of this recording, Greeley news sources report the machine has been loaned to a spiritualism expert and historian for authentication and study. This has been The Haunted Hustle. Thanks for listening. The Haunted Hustle is an original production of Toil and Trouble Media. Executive produced by Jennifer Beck. This episode was also written and performed by Jennifer Beck. I'm kind of a big deal. Additional production assistance was provided by Erin Iris, and our music was by Kevin MacLeod, Light Saturation, and the Schizoid Nightmares. Thanks, guys. If you've enjoyed our podcast, and I really hope you do, be sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast provider and follow us on social media so you'll never miss an episode. And give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Heck, give us a 5-star rating on all of them. We can use all the stars we can get. And help us spread the word. Tell your friends about our show and its totally bingeable content. Tell your spirit guides too. We're not picky. And if you want to help us bring even more Toil and Trouble to the world, check out our merch and our Patreon pages. We have a link at toilandtroublemedia.com, or you can find it on Patreon itself. Just look for a sign. Well, it's the owl, but close enough. And as always, thanks for listening.